Hello, Philosophy 101 online, fall 2013. I've now posted your first midterm exam, and I figured what I would do is go over my expectations for this exam and for the questions themselves, just to clarify what I'm looking for. So this will be your first midterm exam. These questions are going to isolate a passage of text or a central idea, more frequently the latter, from this course material, and we'll ask you actually a number of specific questions about the passage or the idea. They're designed not to be tricky or difficult, but as you've probably already noticed, this material is, well, it's different. Right. So the first thing that I want you to keep in mind is that you should read these questions carefully before answering them, and to actually spend a lot of time thinking them through and planning your answers. Now, I encourage you to use anything that's out there in the way of intellectual resources, anything that really helps you understand the material. But when you submit your responses to these questions, they've got to reflect an individual effort and be in your own words. That said, if you're using any sort of material external to the course material, or citing a passage from the text itself, or one of the supplementary videos, tell me where you got it. Right? This stuff is all out there for you to use, and what's more, frankly, right, just so long as you tell me where you got it and then use it to develop your own responses to these questions, it's fair game. But at the end of the day, when I'm reading these questions, I'm asking myself the simple question, right? Have they clearly demonstrated that they understand what's going on with this material and demonstrated a facility with working with these ideas to do the specific things I asked them to do? That's how you're being evaluated. So I'm going to repeat. Please refer to the course syllabus and the policy on plagiarism, and ensure that your responses comply with academic integrity standards. So if you don't know what plagiarism is, there is a link on the syllabus to that SiteWrite program, or send me an email. I will be around on email this weekend. I'm actually traveling by train, but there's wireless. So I have about 8 hours where I'm just staring straight at my laptop. So please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions that you might have about the course policies, about the academic integrity policies, about the exam policies, about the questions themselves. I prefer questions about content. All right, so please feel free to contact me with any questions that you might have. I'm currently in my office hours, which are Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 11 to 12 at Oakland University. My office is in O'Dowd Hall 319. I'll be here from 11 to 12 on Monday as well. I'm actually usually here till about 12:30. So feel free, if you're on campus, to stop by and see me to discuss or strategize or what have you. Now, the other thing I will mention about what I did with this exam, you'll notice on Moodle that it's available only until the due date. So you can submit your responses up until the point and time when the exam is due, which is Tuesday, the 8th of October by noon. If you're submitting your exam after the due date and deadline time, this requires a conversation with me. So please keep in mind, if your pet gets sick, or if you get sick, or a family member gets sick, or life happens generally, right, let me know, and I can be 90% sure that I will give you some sort of an extension and will work out a way for you to submit this exam to me. Right? But this requires a conversation. Right? So I generally like to not accept late assignments unless there's some sort of agreement and conversation between us. Right? So just so that there are no misunderstandings or last minute panics at 12:01, right, on Monday, 1 minute past noon, you won't be able to submit at 12:01. So please give yourself lots of time. Don't leave it right till the last minute. And in fact, the strategy for answering these questions that I would have is to give yourself all the time in the world, read over the questions, and point form structure out your answer. Right? Make sure it hangs together. Write out your answer, turn it into sentences and paragraphs, properly reference it, proofread it, and then submit it. Right? These are each fairly substantial questions, so and there are a total of 6 of them. I'm going to grade these answers out of 5 points each for a total of 30 points. Please note that on the syllabus, these exams, both of the midterms and the final, same format for each of them, 6 questions, 5 points each for a total of 30. That means each one of these questions is worth a total of 5% of your final grade. Right? So keep that in mind when you're deciding how much to write, how substantial to make your responses. So that way, when you, like if you, for example, submit 3 sentences in response to one of these questions, well, even if those are the most wonderful, direct, critical, reflective, and concise sentences that you have ever created, you've just gotten a C, right? Because the maximum I can give per sentence might be 1 point. Right, so in fact, what I require on these exams is a minimum of 2 paragraphs. A paragraph is technically 3 sentences, no fewer. So a minimum of 2 paragraphs for response to each of these questions. Right, so you've got to answer them all. That's a minimum of 2 paragraphs. Keep in mind, a minimum, I'm telling you how to satisfy the bare bones minimum for success. Really, I would treat each of these questions kind of like a mini essay, right? So, because they are substantial questions. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these questions and give you an idea of what I'm looking for. There are 3 on the Socrates material, 2 on the Apology, and 1 on the Credo. Right. I'm going to fix something today. I actually quoted a section of text and forgot to properly reference it myself. I was in a hurry. I was sloppy. It's big trouble if you do this, and I'm going to fix it this afternoon and update the assignment on Moodle with the proper page reference. So, question 1 for Socrates reads, Socrates argues that we should have a deep sort of reverence for the notion of truth, though maintains that, quote, human wisdom is worth little or nothing, end quote. Plato 5 Dialogues, page 27. Simply put, we can know nothing. Present an account of this position in your own words. Right. And what I'm looking for here is Socrates' epistemology, or theory of knowledge, right? Which is distinct from that of the sophists, right? So the sophists claim that, well, we can't know anything, so what we should do is, well, make money, try to develop power through the use of our arguments, which can be merely persuasive. Doesn't matter if they're true. We can't know the truth, so we can't require people to hold to the truth. Socrates' position is different, though he starts from the same point. We know nothing of the big T truth. But in a sense, we can hold ourselves to standards, right, that require us to have integrity and critically evaluate any claims that we might make of the truth. So this is an interesting position. That's the position in sort of Cliff Notes version that I want you to address. Right? The next part of the question asks you to address this. In the absence of knowledge of truth, how does Socrates develop a moral position from this reverence for truth? Right? Is this position, by your arguments, justifiable? So I ask you to do 3 things. First off, present Socrates' epistemology. Why is he the wisest man in Athens? Right? Secondly, talk about how he develops arguably a moral position from his epistemological position. Right? And then thirdly, critically evaluate that position. Note that I'm not asking you to agree with this. I'm just asking you to present the argument in your own words and then to critically evaluate it. And this is an option that's open to you for all of these questions, even if I don't specifically ask you to critically evaluate this position. This is, well, it's the stuff of philosophy. By Socrates' own position, we should constantly be engaging with these kinds of questions. Now, if I were to answer a question like this, I would break it down into those three parts. First thing I do is present his epistemology. Second thing I do is present his ethics. Right? Third thing I do is critically evaluate the position. And note that probably the best way to do this is to break this question down into 3 paragraphs rather than just 2. Right? But nonetheless, I require a minimum of 2. The reason I require a minimum of 2 is because I was getting exams submitted, each question 5% of the final grade, and they're like 2 sentences long. Well, even if those sentences are perfect, you've still failed. All right. So, anyhow, that's the first question. The second question, also from the Apology, has to do with the social and political purpose of the position that Socrates is arguing here, where he compares himself to a gadfly. So, present the gadfly argument in your own words. And what I can do, if you give me 1 second here, is pull out my copy of the 5 dialogues and turn to the page where the gadfly argument is. You will find it on page, just 1 second, here we are, 35. All right, that's where he presents the gadfly argument. Now, that's the first part of the question. All right. Now, the next part of the question, right, has you sort of drawing inferences from this gadfly argument. Remember, Socrates is arguing in a context of a democracy, and he's arguing to the courts of Athens, which make not only legalistic kind of decisions, but also decisions that the executive branch of your government would make. Right? What should be taxed, what the laws should be, whether to go to war or stay at peace, etc., etc. And it's through these courts that the democracy, the direct democracy of the ancient Athenian government, functions. So this is how they're making all of their decisions. Ask yourself, right, this sort of moral reasoning that Socrates is arguing for in terms of the gadfly, right? Why would this be important in the context of a functioning democracy? Why would this kind of critical activity be absolutely necessary if you want your democracy to function properly? Right? So that's the second part of the question. And then the third part of the question, right? What political rights or protections or freedoms does this argument serve to reinforce in our own democratic societies? I pluralize there because I'm from Canada and I'm aware most of you are from the United States. Right? But nonetheless, in our own societies, we protect people's ability to engage in these kinds of gadfly activities, right? To argue their conscience and whatnot. Right? So that's the third part of the question that I want you to engage with there. Right? And then finally for Socrates, the third question has to do with the Crito. Remember in the Crito, this is an argument that Socrates and Crito are having about whether to put into action an escape plan. Right? Crito's already bragged the guards. He's set this thing in motion. He's funded it, and he showed up, supplied Socrates with an argument for why he thinks Socrates should get the heck out of Dodge and go to Syracuse or Thessaly or away and not drink the hemlock. Right? So the question reads, in the Crito, while considering escape, Socrates claims that the justice of the plan is, quote, the only valid consideration. Now, that's where I neglected to put a reference. It's Plato 5 Dialogues, page 51, pertaining to their final decision to act. Right? So Crito shows up and says, "Hey, Socrates, we got to get out of here. I've bribed the guards. I've got a plan. I've got a number of places where you can live, and I've got an argument for why I think you should get out of here." Right? Socrates responds that the only valid consideration in such matters is whether or not it's just to give money and thanks to both Crito and his accomplices for this escape, right? And to put the plan into action, right? So, to examine the justice of this matter, Socrates engages in sort of a hypothetical conversation with the laws of Athens, in which he presents two extremely important related notions, that of the social contract and that of tacit consent. So you remember this from your reading. Right? The laws of Athens might take a look at us in our situation and say, "Socrates, what are you planning to do? Why are you trying to destroy us, etc., etc., etc." And to explain this attempt to destroy the laws of Athens, Socrates introduces the notion of a social contract, and related to that, somebody might say, "Hey, wait, I never explicitly agreed to this, right? I didn't give my consent to this contract." Well, there's a method of giving assent to a social contract that's distinct from the social contract itself. In the context of a democracy, it's sort of implied. Right? But in the context of a civil society, we'll see later on in the course how tacit consent still functions. Right? So the first thing you're doing here is discuss these notions of the social contract and tacit consent in your own words, drawing a distinction between the two of them. Show how they're related, show how they're distinct, define them, discuss them. Right? And the second part of the question, how does Socrates draw on these notions to call moral question to the escape plan presented by Crito, right? Not only discuss these notions and discuss how they're, sort of related but distinct from one another, but then once you're done that, detail the argument that Socrates presents, drawing on these notions and using them to call question to the plan presented by Crito. Note here, feel free to call Socrates a bonehead, right? Feel free not to agree with the argument. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. Really, what we're doing by taking a look at the arguments here and in the other text is trying to sharpen your critical, linguistic, and argumentative abilities. That's the name of the game in this course. So, that's what we're doing. That's Socrates. Now, the last three questions pertain to Plato's Phaedrus. All right, so you've seen the video lectures. I've posted an additional video about Plato's theory of the forms. It touches on the theory of recollection, etc., etc., right? So you've got the book, you've got my video lectures, you've got some supplementary material, and you've been hashing through the discussion forums as well. By the way, while I'm mentioning the discussion forums, note that the first question is very similar to what you discussed in the discussion forum. Right? So you should have quite a lot to draw on. Right? Now, question 4 reads, right, for Plato. Plato, in the Phaedrus, argues that the right sort of love, that is, Platonic love, can bring us closer to the perfect truth of the forms. So the first thing that I want you to do with this argument, and it's sort of a complicated argument, I'm aware I'm asking you to do a little bit with these questions. First part of the question asks you to present an overview of Plato's theory of the forms, his metaphysics, and the theory of recollection, his epistemology. Right? So all you have to do is, you don't even need to engage with the poetry that forms the argument that is presented in the Phaedrus. I lay this out for you on the teaching video, right? And what's more, I've given you a supplementary video as well. Tell me what the forms are. Tell me how we know them, which is the theory of recollection. Second part of the question, discuss how this argument presents love as a beneficial sort of madness. That is, what is special about love in the context of Plato's metaphysics and epistemology. And here's your hint. I gave this to my on-campus class. To be fair, I've got to give it to you. Beauty. There's something special about the form of beauty. Right? So, anyhow, that's question 4. I would break that again down into parts, and you're just basically presenting the argument in 2 separate parts. So, hopefully that's nice and clear. The second question. Plato, through his discussion of the constitution of the soul, draws a distinction between the effects of an erotic relationship and those of platonic love. Part 1 of the question. Introduce the description of the constitution of the soul offered by Plato. Remember that awful argument about how every soul is in motion, things that are in motion, etc., etc. The constitution of the soul stuff comes right after that argument. Right? Here begins the proof. He presents an absolutely horrible argument for the immortality of the soul, says so much for that, and then draws an interesting metaphor to describe what the soul is like. That's the argument that I want you to introduce. That's my pie chart describing the various parts of the soul. So part 1 of this question, introduce the description of the constitution of the soul offered by Plato. Part 2 of the question asks you to discuss the effects of each of the sorts of relationship discussed in the Phaedrus in terms of that argument about, or that metaphor presented about the constitution of the soul. So, you should discuss the non-love relationship. You should discuss erotic love. And then finally, you should discuss what's going on with platonic love as it pertains to his argument, his metaphor about the constitution of the soul. Right? So part 1, here's the constitution of the soul. Part 2, well, in a non-love relationship, the soul is X. In an erotic love relationship, something interesting happens, and that's Y. But finally, in a platonic relationship, something even more interesting happens, and that's Z. Right? So that's more or less how you break down that question. That's what I'm asking. And then finally, right, and this should have a familiar ring to it because it's your discussion form question in a simpler sort of phrasing, right? Question 6 reads, Plato, with Platonic love, introduces a productive sort of love that would actually be beneficial in Socrates' second speech in the Phaedrus. Note that this is drawing on everything you've answered in questions 4 and 5. However, Plato himself argues that this sort of love is really, really hard to achieve. Given this, would the non-love relationship discussed in the first 2 speeches, that from Lysias and Socrates' first speech, given the overpowering tendencies of Eros, be a safer alternative for most of us? Right? Keep in mind, in that second speech where he defines Eros, love, the kind of love Lysias introduces, the kind of love he's taking up in his Socrates' first speech, right? He introduces Eros as a form of madness, or what's more, if you look at that footnote, a form of hubris. And in that footnote, it's interesting to note that the ancient Athenian sort of sense of the word hubris means more than just how we mean it, which is arrogance, right? If somebody is hubristic, we generally today mean that they're arrogant. But there's a deeper sense to the word for the ancient Athenians. It's linked by Plato through the character Socrates, right, to the motivations, the sorts of drives that bring about things like sexual assault. The kind of madness that's described in the first 2 speeches, the erotic kind of madness, right, is compared by Socrates to things like alcoholism and gluttony. Right? So it's pretty overpowering. It's by definition. Look at page 18. It's a type of desire that overcomes our better judgment and is driven to take pleasure in beauties. It's force reinforced by its desire, kindred desires for beautiful bodies, and takes its name from the word of force and is called eros. That's what it's defined as. And keep in mind also that that definition of eros remains throughout. Socrates, in his second speech, as presented by Plato, is arguing that love it's crazy, it's madness, it's hubris, but it's one of the good kinds, right? So what I want you to do with this sort of ball of wax argument is to take a step back from the whole argument presented in the first 49 pages of the Phaedrus and discuss this issue critically, presenting arguments to support your position which address all sides of the issue. So what I'm not asking you to do here is opine, right? In previous semesters, I did not have that clause, which address all sides of the issue. So frequently, I would just get, well, platonic love sounds nice and all, but I like eros, and it's an argument in favor of eros, which is interesting, and I guess it's kind of what I asked, lacking that last condition, right, which address all sides of the issue. So in previous semesters, it's like, darn, they did what I asked, but it's not really what I had intended them to do. So I'm a little bit more clear here. All right? So I want you to address platonic love. I want you to address the potential pitfalls of erotic love, and I want you to evaluate whether or not really non-love is a safe alternative for most of us, or whether Plato's argument about the self-control, this really, really hard act of exerting self-control, right, is really, given the playing with fire nature of eros, a safe enough alternative. Because what are the effects of an erotic relationship? Well, we saw that in the first couple of arguments. In Lysias, we see that lovers lie, lovers are jealous, lovers keep their eye on the balance sheet, lovers aren't trustworthy, they're braggarts, right? There are all of these problems. Lovers don't even know if they want to be your friends once their desire dies down, because they usually start by desiring your body, right? And what's more, Socrates, in the second line of argument in his first speech, presents the harmful effects on your intellect, on your possessions, and on your physical development, right? Showing that the love of the lover arises with no goodwill at all. No, its purpose is like food, right? To satisfy desire. Do wolves love lambs? That's how a lover befriends their beloved. Paraphrasing. Right? So it's playing with fire. Anyhow, this exam is due by October 8th by noon. That's 12 p.m. noon. Submit your responses via Moodle by or before this date in .doc, docx, PDF, or .txt format. I can open an Open Freely document, but I know students have had trouble with Open Freely kind of freeware software in the past. I wouldn't trust it. I would make sure it's all there, right? Because when students in the past have submitted documents to that, or in that format, part of their documents have, in some cases, gone missing, right? It's been a big thing because your exam then isn't complete. You wind up getting a bad grade. We've got to address it, and all of that sort of thing. So the formats .doc, .docx, PDF, or TXT work just fine, and those are reliable. Please also keep in mind that by submitting this document, you are claiming that this is your work, this is your words, this is your reflections, and in fact, all of the academic integrity policy and standards required by Oakland University and in this course are going to be strictly enforced, right? So if the idea or the words come from somewhere else, you need to give me a reference in order to tell me where it's come from. Right. Most of the cases that I have go through academic conduct committees could have been avoided altogether just by putting in a footnote. Right. I I use external sources when I write. Right? It's there for you to use. But nonetheless, in your course books, given the video lectures, given the forums, and given the supplementary material, you should have everything you need to answer all of these questions. So, if there are any questions that you have, like I say, here's my lovely office at Oakland University. I'll be here Monday from 11 till probably about 12:30. I'll also be actually stuck on a train for a good 8 hours this weekend with wireless staring straight at my laptop. So feel free to contact me with any and all questions that you might have with regard to this material, with regard to this assignment, and with regard to the course, always, generally. Right? Okay, I hope this was helpful, and break a leg. All right, cheers.